Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first of hopefully many alumni chats we have. Joining us from as an IT Masters graduate is Craig Ford. We're here for an IT Masters in Charles Uni alumni chat. This one's going to be about how to develop your IT career into cybersecurity. We'll be focusing mostly on that one. I suppose it's the elephant in the room is we hope everyone's okay out there. It's a really wild time with the coronavirus situation rapidly changing, and we can only say that we hope everyone's okay and working online and looking after themselves and each other. Pretty clearly, we use Zoom for these sorts of webinars, and we really encourage the use of chat and the asking of questions throughout these webinars, and we want you to do that for this one as well. I think tonight is slightly different to usual, but we'll go with the general split of if you want to ask Craig a question about what he's talking about specifically during his during this discussion, chuck it in the Q&A section. If you want to sort of talk around what we're throwing around, if you want to just add your input or your experiences, chuck it in the chat, and it's really a valuable insight into what your insights into your perspectives are really valuable and can help others who have perhaps less experience. Chantel's here tonight as well. Chantel's the Education Director at IT Masters, and we'll be hopefully getting involved in the chat as well, sort of talking about the crossover between the way we design the education and the vocational outcomes and why I've done it in particular ways. And we'll have a bit of a chat about IT Masters as well later on, but hopefully not too much. Hopefully we'll get enough questions to make it pretty unimportant. I suppose the only thing to say for those that have never really dealt much with us before is that we're a partner organisation to Charles Sturt University, and we deliver and market a lot of their, well, not a lot of their, but some of their paid courses, mostly around IT and management, and they're our only partner as well. So I'm hoping that this webinar will be a bit of a sort of an open forum. We said in the email, bring your mics. If you're keen to have a chat about, whether your experiences, sort of dovetail with Craig's or whether you have a completely different idea, we'd love to hear it, and we'd love to hear other people's stories, because this is really a webinar, I hope, about helping people get into a place they want to be. It should also be said that it's not necessarily the case that everyone wants to move from IT or IT management into cybersecurity. It might be the other way around, so feel free to chuck that in there. We'll have a bunch of polls through the night, so that'll really help us, I guess, in terms of how we frame the chat and which directions we go. But yeah, we're hoping to make it as open as possible, and any sort of efforts you can make to help that process would be really, I'd be really grateful for. So I suppose we'll start with the first poll, I guess now. Are you familiar with our short courses? Because this will probably give us a bit of an idea as to who we're talking to. And in the meantime, I'll probably introduce, it's probably a good time to introduce Craig Ford, who's an author and someone who works in cybersecurity, and double graduate from an IT Masters, Charles Sturt University Masters. I'm sure he'll more eloquently tell the story. So can you please welcome Craig?
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope we have a nice sort of collaborative session tonight and learn quite a lot from each other.
So just looking at that poll now, we've got about 55-45 split yes or no, so that'll be interesting. Yeah, which is really great. I'm glad of that, actually. If it was just talking to the same people we normally do, there'd be not too much point, but this is good. So I'll share that poll on the screen, and you should all be able to see that. In the end, it got close to 60-40 split. We'll be running for about an hour, but we're quite happy to run a bit long if if the discussion warrants it. So I guess the next question about who's here will be what best describes your career. This is mostly about moving your IT career or career generally into cybersecurity. we've got, I don't work in IT, about 25%. I work in IT, but not in security or management, about 50%, which will be probably the best group for us to talk to, because the rest around 10%. So that's really good. We can maybe put people on a pathway towards, where they want to be, and perhaps the fact that you're early on in your career, it means there's not much of an opportunity cost, and we can plan for the future. So I'll just share that poll as well. Alrighty. Well, Craig, perhaps a good time to get cracking into the slides. I suppose let's start with the agenda. So we'll start with talking about Craig's story with IT Masters and how he came to that point, and of making the jump into study and where it took him work-wise. And then we'll hopefully talk about how that went into studying cybersecurity, a second Masters, and then changing career in whilst doing it. Really interested in, I guess, hearing other people's stories while we do that, because then we can bring people in and sort of say, well, this is how I did it. Because I think one of the things that I expect to come out of tonight is, and Craig, I'm not sure whether you agree, is that there's no sort of one way to do it. It's going to be all sorts of pathways.
No, I definitely agree. I think that there's definitely more than one way to do it, and it'd be interesting just to get those other perspectives from the other people that have done it as well.
We'll have a really big Q&A session at the end of it, I hope. And feel free to send your questions in now, because if they're particularly relevant to what we're talking about, then we'll just jump in and answer the question straight away. So yeah, and then there's a book giveaway at the end of it, and we're just going to basically do, I'm quite happy for us to buy, say, 10 books, Craig, and we'll just give them away to the best questions at the end of the night.
Okay, sounds good.
So yeah, so just for your information. Okay. Well, if we get into the next slide, let's talk about you, Craig.
It's always a fun thing talking about yourself.
Oh yeah, no pressure.
So yeah, if we just start with the first point there, my first job in IT was a bit of a contract job, my initial one, probably late 1999, early 2000. I actually did the first real IT job I did was just a 2-week contract with TAFE New South Wales, where I helped them do some upgrades and some maintenance on the IT lab. But I think for me, the job I actually classed as my first job was with a sort of a small sort of IT services company in Inverell, New South Wales, if anyone knows where that is, called Desline. Worked with them for probably 5 years before sort of moving to Gold Coast. Sort of went through that and sort of moved on to Gold Coast Tourism, where I was their internal IT support for a few years. But it was probably 3 or 4 years then before I was asked to come back and manage Desline, which is when I started that first Masters, the Masters of IT Management, with that sort of a focus to go towards very much a management style sort of career path. But I sort of got about halfway sort of through it, and I'd done a incident response. I think it was Jeremy Coster, I think the person that ran the unit at the time.
That'd be him.
And it was, yeah, very, very sort of interesting, and sort of, I suppose you would say it was the hook that sort of brought me into the security arena. And I sort of haven't stopped since. I've sort of always been pushing towards that security direction now. So it's quite interesting. I never had that sort of, I suppose you would say, direction towards security until sort of that particular unit. And it just sort of, it's surprising that what one little thing can sort of pull you in that sort of different direction. So
yeah, just on that, he's doing a short course at the moment on the CISM certification. He's doing a short course primer for that. So we'll get a link to that in the chat going.
They should definitely check it out. He's pretty good. So
yeah, so it's a lot of fun so far.
But then sort of industry certifications wise, I'd sort of done the Comptia Network Plus and Security Plus before I'd sort of done anything to do with the more formal qualifications with the Masters. But it was more out of just having a little bit more broader knowledge in the IT arena side of things, not particularly to go to security. But I think it was probably definitely, I think that unit and that interest that really made me change my direction from more of a, I suppose you would say, CIO focus long term, be in that sort of very much IT management. I think it definitely pulled me towards the CISO side of things, and yeah, it was quite interesting. Bit of a change, bit of a flick of a switch, but yeah, it hasn't stopped since. I think that was around 2012 or 2013. I decided that's the major direction that I was going to focus on permanently. So yeah, it was very interesting. But probably the last point with the why I wanted to write a book about it. I wrote the book probably for a few reasons. I think the initial idea from it actually came from Mandy Turner. I don't know if any of you know who Mandy Turner is, but she's a big cybersecurity figure, and the AISA, I think she's the exec for Brisbane. So basically it was her idea. I was already starting to write the articles for CSO, which is the cybersecurity journalist job that I had until very recently, but that's a conversation we might get into a bit later. But basically sort of she suggested that that sort of small form content could be used in sort of the more book arena. So I sort of put together and sort of rewrote a lot of the original articles I did on sort of how to get into cybersecurity. I think there's some of you might know the Are You Crazy for going into cybersecurity? That was quite a popular one that I changed into one of the chapters. But yeah, it was sort of really aimed at trying to share as much of the knowledge and much of the journey as I could with anybody who was interested in sort of getting into the same arena and wanted to do that same journey. So that's generally me. At the moment, I currently work for Davici, which is a managed security services company in Brisbane. And yeah, that's probably moves us along to the studying with the IT Masters. I think the whole studying process, do you want to say something there, Guy?
Yeah. No, not yet. No, that's okay. Let's go.
Keep going. Yep. So yeah, with the IT Masters, the studying, I found it really good. I actually really enjoyed, particularly that sort of 50-50 split. I thought I found that really good with the sort of the academic and the industry related. I found personally that was quite good because it helped me get that sort of real world understanding and the more certification side. So I found that quite good. The biggest challenge probably is juggling work, life. I have 2 children, a 4-month-old little boy now, and it's quite hard to juggle work and study and writing and everything else all in the one little thing. So it's definitely a bit of a challenge, but I think the reward out of the sort of the probably not just the qualification, but I think the confidence that it gives you as you sort of go through the process, my writing and my communication skills has definitely improved quite a lot over the 2 masters I've done. So I think that is definitely a benefit, and I probably would never have written a book without that sort of increased sort of skill set in the writing side of things. So I think that's definitely
important is it important in the cybersecurity role as well? I
think so, because when you're sort of in a cybersecurity, particularly in penetration testing and that sort of stuff, which is what I'm heavily involved in my day job, you sort of need to be able to write the reports and the information, particularly for incident response or the actual penetration testing side of things, because for everybody to understand, it needs to be a language that makes sense to everybody. You need to sort of be able to be a bit of a wordsmith, I suppose you would say, and put it in a language that everyone understands and not just in the technical side of things, which I see a lot of more technical folk have a bit of trouble with, sort of making it understandable by everybody. Yes, there's certain sort of places where you would need to provide that more technical details and technical data, but I think a lot of the time people don't want to know that. They just want to know in their language what we're talking about. So I think the communication side and the writing side is definitely important. So yeah, I definitely feel that made me a better security person, I guess you would say.
And how did you cope with, to change topics slightly, how did you cope with the I guess the time pressures, you know, with the wee babies and the work and the writing and everything?
To be honest, it was a little bit of less sleep sometimes, but but it was manageable. I think what you kind of needed to do, what I did specifically is I sort of tried to sort of give my family and the work up until sort of usually like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And then after that, I would allocate a 2 or 3 hour block where that was my study time or that was my writing time, depending on what I was doing at that day, and sort of would stick to that, still giving yourself a bit of that sort of family time and a bit of interaction time. And even still, you know, you can still go out and hang out with friends and stuff on the weekends, but you just got to make sure that you allocate enough time to give it justice to make sure you get through the content properly. But it was certainly not easy, but I think definitely rewarding. That's for sure.
And Chantel, is that sort of something that you would agree with? Is there, I suppose that might be a common story. Is there other ways that people do it? Do you have a way that you suggest people do it?
My mic has disappeared. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yep, we can
good.
hear you.
Sorry, something's gone wrong with my Zoom a little bit. It is definitely something. I think most of our students have kids and well, most of them work full time at the very least. And babies don't always listen when you say, yeah, I've got my 2 to 3 hour study period right now. And we've found the best habit for students to get into is to pick a time and try and study in that time. And if you'll get used to it, but find your right time to do it. So don't decide to do it at 8 p.m. because that's when it was suggested. Find out when you work best, because we all have different clocks. And if you can get some done every single day, you will always succeed. Whereas the students who try and get everything done the week the assignment is due will always struggle a little bit. Unless, of course, they are
superstars, which no doubt all of you are. Craig, did you do it sort of everyday styles, or did you?
I tried to.
On blocks?
I tried to sort of do it when I could. Sort of nights was my sort of time that sort of worked for me, because it was after the little ones would go down for that first sort of sleep. So you'd get a couple hours where you would sort of usually be able to sort of easily sort of put in a bit of time for study or writing or whatever I was doing. So yeah, but nights was good for me. But yeah, is Chantel, was it? Sorry.
Yep, Chantel.
Right. Yep, Chantel, like Chantel said, you got to sort of choose that right time for you. So I think, yeah, you're definitely spot on there that it's night works for me, but if it's early mornings, but you just got to choose that time that sort of fits in around your life and sort of make that sort of happen as much as possible. And yeah, don't leave it till the last minute, like Chantel said, you'll never succeed with that. That you sort of, the better preparation, the much easier you'll find it, in my personal opinion. It was, if you sort of had to try and rush an assignment, yeah, it never went so well. So yeah, it's always good. Most groundwork you can do, the better. So
yeah.
And I will say, the big tip that people seem to forget, if you can find something that's related to your work, if you look at the assignments and you see one that you might be able to turn into your own work, do it, because we want you to use your experiences. And if you can apply it in everyday life, you'll learn it. If you can't apply it, it's so much harder.
Yeah, right. So let's get people into cybersecurity jobs then. Let's go to the next slide and talk about making that transition. I guess I've got a poll here, I think, about who wants to actually get in there. Well, first of all, I think we have to launch this poll because it's a bit of fun.
I'll wait.
Let's settle the question that Craig sees asked constantly. Do you think there's a correct way to spell cybersecurity? Very controversial. Apparently, Craig uses it interchangeably, though just doesn't particularly worry. I think I really like cybersecurity with a space, and it's sort of grown.
Looks
on
like
me.
That's the one that's kind of winning there by the looks of that.
Excellent. Correct, everyone. You will be in the pole position to get the books later on. Beauty. So I think an overwhelming majority of 57%.
I'll have to pay more attention now. Make sure I put the spaces in the middle.
Absolutely. But we do have another question. Have you already tried to get in? We assume that a fair few of you would like to sort of study, to work in cybersecurity, I should say. Have you already tried to gain entry to the cybersecurity field? And there's an interesting answer here. There's no such thing as an entry-level position in cybersecurity. Craig and I were talking with Chantel a little bit earlier before we went live, and there's heaps of ways to think about it, but wondering why people might think that there isn't an entry-level position.
That's a fairly even split there too, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, about 45, 45, 10. Right, so that's interesting. And then we've got a follow-up poll. So we had 42, 47, and 11 for yes, no, and there's no such thing as an entry-level in position in cybersecurity. And I think that's an important talking point in itself, Craig. Like, it seems to me that cybersecurity is expanding so quickly in terms of how many people are employed. There's going to be all sorts of different types of people that are necessary, or there'll necessarily be many different types of people working in cybersecurity. So just to go to your book for a sec, there's a chapter on hiring talent, and one of your key, I guess, first of all, the key is having an interest in cybersecurity, but you sort of make the distinction between those with programming backgrounds or IT backgrounds, and I'd even include now, people with almost no background who have, the right sort of temperament to be doing that kind of work. Would you agree that there's no sort of one size fits all?
I think so, particularly in the variety of sort of work that we're sort of getting with your security awareness and the more human side of things. I think you will see a lot more people with your sort of arts backgrounds and your psychology backgrounds that will be very successful. I think the technical side of things we can teach. It's something that they can learn. The interactions and stuff with the people is the stuff that they will need, that as sort of a trait they have in them. So I think, yeah, a bit of a variety. I think if we can pull it from all different sort of backgrounds and like have a bit more of a diversity, not just male and female, but ethnical backgrounds, your experiences in life, different sort of family set configurations. I think that will give us that sort of variety we need to really pull together and sort of come up with the ideas to fix some of the problems that we're not being very successful, I suppose you would say, up until now, to try and sort of solve. So I definitely think more variety, the better. I think that'll make us a better industry.
And also just varied skill sets. Do you think that there's, cybersecurity positions for, I don't know, people like we were talking earlier about, awareness roles where there's some people view it as an education role, and I was questioning whether it's even cybersecurity role, but it's pretty clear that it actually is. And so someone like me who has not much technical ability but sort of knows a lot of the talking points and can at least hopefully seem to talk about them in a way that is confident and increases awareness for others. Is that a realistic pathway into cybersecurity?
I think so. I think you're particularly for someone like yourself, you're really good with the interaction and the conversations with people, which is particularly in the security awareness. I find that if you can connect to the audience and make it something they understand, it doesn't need to be technical at all. It can be pretty simple, easy sort of suggestions to help them understand things a little bit better. I think, yeah, you're definitely someone that, like your set of skill set is with the talking to people and sort of the interacting, I think is a huge thing. And I think, yeah, it would be, I would say that's one of the sort of, I would say industry sort of starting points, like a starter position. I think that is definitely something that you would class as in one of those sort of entry level positions, definitely. Particularly if you have a basic sort of understanding of the technical, you could be easily taught what was necessary to go through in those sort of classes and help the rest of the audience sort of understand a little bit better.
And just from the chat, we've got Alvin in there who's wondering whether SOC is the best way, and and for some people that would certainly be the case. If you've got a strong technical background, by all means, the doing of the thing is crucially important and needs to be done in all cases.
Yeah,
so
definitely have to agree. Particularly, you're right with that. If they have that technical background already, they would only need to sort of upskill themselves a little bit more in the security side of things to be able to take an entry level position, if they say there's an entry level position or not. But that sort of base sort of position, I think, is a good place to start with someone who already has that sort of foundation technical knowledge, in my opinion anyway.
Cool, that's what we're here for. Next poll, what did you hear when you did sort of try and get in? How's the reception been for cybersecurity positions you've applied for? Do you keep getting rejections with no explanations, or do you get some good feedback? I guess it's a good opportunity to take the pulse, so to speak, of the industry itself. And the options here for those that can't see them have been applying but not getting any responses, been applying but told I don't have enough experience or the right qualifications. All responses to applications have been positive with great feedback, just no luck landing that first job. And everyone is chasing unicorns, those with programming skills, communication skills, IT skills.
And 12 certifications.
Yeah. And a relatively even split. The lowest, unfortunately, is all responses to applications have been positive.
Which sadly is kind of expected.
Yeah, probably, you could guess with the question being asked. Been applying but not getting any responses, 25%. Been applying but told I don't have enough experience or the right qualifications is the leader on 34. And everyone is chasing unicorns, which perhaps expresses a bit of a frustration at the first two, at 30% also. So I'll share that one. So maybe if we go to the next slide, Craig, we can, I guess, talk about some of the ways to get into it. Yeah, we've got various options here, and there's the poll for those that can see it. I'll take that down now. So what do you reckon, Craig? How I guess, what are some of the general ways, and how did you do it particularly? And if anyone wants to give their story, have done it themselves, I'd love you to write it in the chat, and we'll maybe emphasize that as well.
Okay, sounds good. So just my journey itself, I sort of, as you all know already, I started off with starting that Masters of Management and done a bit of a focus on my elective units towards the security arena. But I found as I sort of started to learn and sort of wanted to sort of get that first position in security, I was getting that same sort of, like in the last poll, most of it was, there wasn't much response. I wasn't really getting any sort of feedback or anything like that. So I started sort of interacting more with the sort of security bodies like your security meetups and the AISA in Brisbane. I have been doing quite a lot of interaction with them, which is quite great. And I think sort of building that network with people in this sort of industry, I think a lot of people from the conversations I've had, their initial first positions come from those sort of relationships as they're building them. So it's a good idea to sort of interact as much as possible, introduce yourself, do some blogging, read blogs, do some interaction with anyone on LinkedIn, any of the other sort of Twitter, whatever you sort of want to do, whatever your sort of platform you like to use, sort of get connected with those sort of people and sort of interact quite a lot with them. You'll learn quite a lot through the process, and you sort of build those relationships which could help you get that first initial position. But yeah, I think volunteer as much as possible, get involved with those sort of things, and be prepared for that sort of sideways step a little bit. A lot of the people sort of want to jump in and do that sort of big CISO role straight away. That's usually is not possible. You sort of have to be a little bit prepared to do that sort of sideways step, sometimes even take a slight pay cut, which no one really likes to do. But I think it's getting that entry level position, it would be a long-term reward to probably take that slight cut possibly and sort of get that industry position and get your sort of foot in the door, and then sort of work from there to get a little bit better position as you sort of build up your skills and your interaction with everybody. And in my case, persistence sort of pays off. You don't sort of get disheartened when you get a lot of those knockbacks, because I got a lot. I got quite a few. It actually, surprisingly, my first full-time security position with Davichi itself, Darren, the owner, actually approached me about the position. So it wasn't me approaching them, and it was just one of those relationships I sort of made on social networking. So it's you just sort of won't know where that opportunity might come from. So you just sort of keep working at it, keep learning more, do some short courses, learn from YouTube videos, just continue to learn. Just make sure you sort of don't sit still. If that's where you want to be, just sort of keep working at it, and long term it'll pay off.
Nice. Glad it worked out for you.
Thanks.
So talking about networking, you've mentioned the AISA, I think it was.
Australian Information Security Association. Yep.
Yeah, can you go through a little bit about that? Just because it's something that comes up a bit in your book and you've talked about.
Yes.
And then in the meantime, folks, I'll launch a poll about like talking about networking and skill acquisition, is it something that you're already involved with? We've got a poll here about the cybersecurity community. Are you an active member of your local cybersecurity community? Were you even aware that there was a cybersecurity community? So there's meetups and ASA or AISA. Do you attend security conferences?
There's sort of the statistics that's sort of coming up there is a little surprising. I thought there might have been a little bit more involvement in some of those sort of meetups, but I think the value in them is, I sort of can't push it across as much as I can. I think those sort of interactions is probably where you'll learn a lot, and I really value those relationships. I still go day to day sometimes to some of the people I've met at particularly AISA. I have a daily interaction with some of the other security professionals, and they're a good person to sort of go to, or a good backup person when you're in sort of a position you're not entirely sure how it's going to play out, particularly in incident response or something like that. It's good to have a bit of a backup and know some people. I suppose you would say, I can't think of what the do you want to be a millionaire? The call for help. The option was
phone a friend.
Phone a friend. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to have that sort of phone a friend option, and I've used it quite a few times myself. So I think, yeah, that those relationships will come in very handy as you sort of make your way into the industry. And like I said before, they could really help you get that entry level position, particularly with AISA. I think that's probably the particular meetups, the monthly sort of meetings they have, particularly in Brisbane, which is where I'm based. I regularly go to those. I think it's pretty rare I don't actually get to the monthly meetings when they hold them now. So it's, and I like to sort of get there and learn the new topics and see what other people are doing, and just sort of doing that interaction, because it sort of helps you keep the finger on the pulse, in my opinion, of what everyone else is doing. And they share pretty openly. It's a pretty open group, which is great. So, and it's pretty friendly. Most of them, if you introduce yourself, they're pretty open and happy to have a chat. And yeah, it's sort of meetups like that, I think is quite handy, particularly as you make that entry point. So.
And yeah, so I'm sharing the results now, and it's roughly a 20-80 split for yes and then no. So there's certainly something that if you're really keen on making a career transition, maybe incorporate some of that into what you're doing. Interesting that you sort of say that these meetups are really good, but sort of it looks like it's not, making its way, the entire way through the industry. You've got a couple of chapters in your book about, I guess, the need to work together on sort of large challenges and sort of collaborating. Do you think it's, and perhaps even since the time you actually wrote this book and have written these chapters, is it sort of improving? Are people working together better now, or do you sort of see it as being an ongoing issue?
I'd love to say it's greatly improved, but yeah, it's probably about the same. My frustration with it probably is a little bit more. I've joined a group, PISN, which is just a group of Brisbane companies that we sort of, I think I based one of my chapters around it. It's sort of going into the lion's den. They're other MSPs and other IT support providers, and we're sort of all in the same room. I think their first initial meeting I went to, it was kind of all just staring at each other a little bit, and took a few beers and some pizza or something before we all warmed up a little bit. But
sad but true.
But yeah, so I think that sort of scenario really is rare. Like, I don't think we get companies like that in the same room. They just go, oh, that's my competition, I'm not going to work with them, I don't want to tell them anything what I'm doing. I think we need to change that mindset a little bit if we're going to be really successful long term and actually beat the malicious actors, which I think we're kind of more on the back foot now, not on the front foot a lot of the time. We're sort of just putting out the fires as they sort of break in and they cause the damage, and we're not really being as successful as I think we should be. But I think those collaborations, particularly in strange little scenarios like the PISN group that I was with, I think if we can create more of those, even if they're industry led by more of the government bodies, I think, like even the JCSC, the Joint Cybersecurity Centres, I think they're quite good because they're trying to bring that sort of interaction and bring us all in that same room. And even with the AISA, I think they still are a little closed off sometimes about saying what specific things that controls they use and what hasn't worked, and any sort of breaches and information they share. They don't like to share some of that intel stuff, but I think, yeah, it would be definitely important if we could sort of encourage that a little bit more, collaboration, because we're all on the same fight, basically. We're trying to get the same end goal. So I think if we can do that, definitely it'd be better.
Interesting. Would that be more of like a systemic critique? Do you think it's like the natural outcome of the way we've geared how we operate, or do you think that there is a way out of it, just in our current paradigm?
I would hope there is. I'd say you're probably right. It is probably the way that we've created the scenario. We've created the industry like this, where we're all closed off. You know, security people were all the people hiding in the basement for so long now. It's sort of strange that we're all out in the open now. It's not a hidden little thing now. We're not in the basement anymore. We're sitting on the boards and that sort of thing. So I think the conversations are starting to happen a bit more. I just don't know if it's because of that initial way that security was approached and that sort of mentality that people sort of created as they were coming through the industry. But I would like to hope we could do it. And I think if we can achieve it, I think it'll be definitely a sort of a win for security industry itself. And I think we'll get a lot of sort of benefit out of it if we can achieve it. But I'm not entirely sure if it'll ever get there, but I'm going to keep pushing anyway until we try. So there's no harm in trying. So.
And is there much of this sort of discussion, I guess the more theoretical subjects as part of the Masters? For those listening along, IT Masters really looks at sort of, the application of theory in an enterprise or commercial or government setting. And Charles Sturt University look at, I guess, the theoretical side of things. And is it something that, is talked about much?
Probably not a great deal, to be honest. I think it was probably touched in a few of the online webinars and a few things like that as part of the discussion. Probably not specifically in the content itself, but yeah, I definitely think there was a few conversations just as part of the webinars themselves, as sort of the weekly webinars or fortnightly webinars, depending on the unit. But I do think it was something that was discussed, but probably not necessarily as part of the main sort of curriculum.
Which probably reflects the industry-wide
yes,
malaise.
It would. Yeah.
So something for those of you who are listening along who are definitely going to apply for a Masters out of this.
Generate the conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Fix it, damn it. Alrighty. Really interesting. So let's see if I've got any polls that talk about this. Oh yes, here's one that's really interesting. And it talks about mentors. Do you think that first of all, Craig, did you have any mentors specifically, or is it just about talking with folk at AISA? The question is, do you think that having an industry mentor would help you gain knowledge and help you transition to a position in cybersecurity? And
I personally,
overwhelmingly yes.
I think yes. I agree entirely with the overwhelming yes that's sort of coming up there. I think we sort of, when I was first coming through, I don't know if a lot of the other people that have done the same sort of journey, but I didn't know where to go or where to look. I think some of the initial conversations I started with the other students on IT Masters and the lecturers, and then through AISA and any of those other meetups, was sort of, you had to learn your own way. You had to find your own path initially. Like back when I first started, I think it's becoming more open and people are helping a little bit more, encouraging people to come through and sort of pushing that mentoring. And I quite like the mentoring style. I have a bit of a relationship with CCM, Cyber Century Mentoring, which Mandy Turner was one of the main founders. Basically, that sort of whole scenario is trying to sort of line up people that would sort of meet and sort of match up sort of personality-wise, that could help generate that mentor and sort of uplift the people a little bit and sort of help them in the industry. I think that, it's quite important. And I think the more we can encourage that relationship, will sort of push away some of that people chasing unicorns and sort of help real people come through and generate a better industry, I think. But yeah, it's a bit of a strange scenario. Like we I was talking before about the whole fact that we're all in the basement and no one sort of talked about it. It was just that sort of mythical, magical thing that everyone did. And now we're sort of all out in the limelight, I guess you would say, particularly like with ASD coming out of sort of the shadows. It sort of shows that we really need to bring cybersecurity in the limelight and help everybody understand it, I think. And the more we can do this, mentors, and sort of build those relationships, I think it would be easier for particularly students. Like if you're sort of learning the foundations and you sort of just have a couple of questions, it's good to have someone to go to for that sort of thing, whether it's a specific mentor or even just a security group or something you sort of join up with. I think it just helps you sort of know which direction, because I was kind of wailing around in the dark, I suppose you would say, initially when I first decided that's the direction I wanted to go. I didn't really know how to do it or what I needed to do and who I needed to talk to, but I think it would be easier definitely if we can show the mistakes that we've already made and help others not make the same ones. So
yeah, and are there sort of online forums that do this, or do they not sort of replicate?
There is some. I think I personally, I'm a people person. I like, which is strange for a highly technical person, but but yeah, I like that human interaction and the discussions that you can have with people and sort of learning from them. But yeah, there's definitely some online communities. There's thousands and thousands of security people on LinkedIn and Twitter that share content all the time. I share as much as I can as well. But so there's definitely forums if you don't like the personal face-to-face meetups, and with some of the issues at the moment going around, I think some online style would be probably the best things to look at initially. But yeah, long term, I think, yeah, definitely some meetups and maybe do a bit of both. I think it's always good to do a bit of both.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, I think we've got about 15 minutes left, and we're quite happy to stay a little late, folks, answer all your questions. But perhaps if we move on to the next slide, Craig, we'll just talk about briefly, hopefully, studying with IT Masters in Charles Sturt Uni. And that's, you know, even the first point, you know, it's an interesting discussion. It says there's a bubble of demand, but how long do you expect that bubble to last? Do you think there'll be sort of a decent, you know, amount of growth for now, or should people jump in quickly? You know, at what point will we have enough cybersecurity, and do you think that eventually we'll all become so, I guess, familiar with it that it won't even be a thing? That just every role will have cybersecurity embedded within it. I
think I like your last point there. I think long term, I think everyone needs to have a little part of the security responsibility. I've actually did another chapter in my upcoming book that cybersecurity is everybody's business. Like, I think everyone needs to be a little bit involved, but I think that particularly with the sort of the skills gap, depending on who you talk in the industry, some people don't think it technically exists. They sort of, I'm sort of sitting the fence. I think there is certainly a bubble, and there's certainly a skills sort of pool we need to fill. But I think a lot of that problem is, like, if we go back to that poll where it was, they're sort of looking for those unicorns, they're not sort of helping people come through. I think that is a big part of our problem. I think we need to sort of find a way to sort of pull people in and sort of make it a little bit easier to come in. But yeah, there's definitely going to be a long-term sort of demand for that sort of bringing people in. I definitely don't think there's going to be breaches and ransomware is going anywhere for quite a long time. So I think they're only going to evolve and they're going to get worse. So I think the demand is only going to grow as more things sort of become more technical. Like if you're talking about your autonomous cars and your self-piloted drones and everything else that they're talking about that's coming in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, we will need to protect those sort of devices as well. And the IoT, I think the demand is definitely there. So I think that the bubble jump in, I think you definitely won't have any issues about having a career long-term, particularly in cybersecurity. And it gives you that opportunity, I feel, to branch out a little bit into either IoT or in OT or whatever sort of variants that you may have a skill set in now, or you want to expand a skill set in later. I definitely think, yeah, the bubble's there. And I think, but I think long-term, I think there's, yeah, quite a lot of opportunity.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a couple of chapters about, you know, hacking through the fridge and what to do with the the cars that are coming.
I try to have a bit of fun with it. They're quite entertaining, a few of the chapters. But
yeah, must have been fun to write. So if there is that bubble of demand, and if there is a bit of long-term security as well, I hope you consider studying with Charles Sturt Uni and IT Masters. We're pretty pleased with the Master of Cybersecurity. We only launched that, I think, at the start of 2018. Chantel, is that right? 2018?
I think so, yeah, 2018 sounds about right.
Yeah, so we basically redeveloped a Master of Information System Security and made it more, I guess, focused on the skills that you'll need to become a cybersecurity expert. So we tried to blend, as I said earlier, sort of the industry subjects and the academia subjects, and by that we mean academia subjects that talk about the theory of computing and cybersecurity and where we are and where we're going and how it turned out that way. But then we also think that it's really important to give people the skills necessary to go and apply that when they get their first job. So often you'll do a subject and people just won't be prepared to actually enter the workforce, and that's where you get sort of maybe some reluctance among the industry, for people hiring, people out of school or looking for people with all sorts of skill sets, because there maybe isn't the trust that these qualifications are actually preparing people. And so often I speak with people who sort of are of the opinion or have been affected by the opinion that certifications are much more important than qualifications, or experience is more important than both. Hopefully in the future it'll sort of be, well, they're not all mutually exclusive. There's no one right way to do things, and people can do it following their own sort of interest and what works best for them. So as part of that, we try and keep it up to the minute. We've just this year developed a subject called pen testing, and it's, I think, roughly based on the GIAC pen testing certification. Chantel, is that right as well?
That's the GPen?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. So all of our subjects that have industry qualifications in them, we try and base it on it, but we don't offer the certification in it, just because it's often too hard to get you to sit that, and it's not academically vigorous a lot of the time. So that's the reason we do that. But you can get credit for a lot of these industry qualifications. So if you have industry certifications, definitely have a little look at this and see if you can get some credit into a master's.
Yeah, really good point. I talk with people most days about mitigating the time and cost associated with study. If you've got, for example, a CISP or the GPen or the Certified Ethical Hacker, Comptia Security Plus, the list is fairly endless. In fact, I'll include a list or include a link to credit map so that those of you with industry certifications can have a look at where you currently stand credit-wise. If you're interested in studying, you may be eligible for some credit towards a couple of our courses. So that might be a good idea. I don't really want to focus too much on, I guess, the marketing side of things and the sales side of things out of this. Just interested in having a nice discussion. So I might just send an email to everyone tomorrow with a bunch of links and information. But we'll also send a load of information that Craig's sort of compiled that he finds interesting and valuable. Sort of, there's a list of blogs that he likes, and there's some links to some of the chapters in the book that he thinks are most relevant to tonight's discussion. So we'll just send you as much as we can tomorrow. Once we process the recording, just so that you've got something to keep a hold of after this, and for those listening along later on, because it'll hopefully be all up on the website after that. So if we go to the next slide, Craig, I think we're up to sort of question time, and there's heaps of questions. If anyone has any questions about getting into study, feel free to hit me up. I'll give you my details in the email, and we can talk about, I guess, specifics in your situation privately. But yeah, there's loads of questions. So I might just whip through them. Hey,
okay.
Go for it, Craig.
That's good.
here's a good one. This is from early on. How would you describe the relationship between digital forensics and cybersecurity? Do you see a transition
That's an
between them?
interesting question. Yeah. Funnily enough, my actual first master's, the Masters of Management, I actually did a digital forensics focus, so I actually have a little bit of crossover on both. I think there is definitely a bit of crossover, and I think there's a good relationship with it, particularly if you're talking the SOC or the incident response side of security. There definitely is a big crossover because you can learn a little bit more. I found with the digital forensics will sort of the investigation process and what happened and how it happened and gathering the evidence side of things. But yeah, there's definitely a bit of crossover and opportunity to do a bit of focus, sort of a bit of foot in both sides, I think. I'm not sure if that answers the question specifically, but yeah, I definitely think there is some crossover, and I think that learning a bit of both is definitely not a problem.
Thank you. Aaron's asked, what are your thoughts on the Comptia exams? Are they a good foundation or option to get your feet wet? Aaron did the Analyst Plus course instead of Security Plus, got them back to front, passed, but a little embarrassed. And just for I guess IT Masters specific information, Security Plus, for example, is a subject credit. And
yes, I actually got a credit for that on my first master's. So
yeah, well there you go. And there's a couple others out there that will get you credit too from Comptia.
But yeah, I found them quite good. I think they're very foundational. So they would give you sort of that sort of foundation knowledge if you haven't done anything in sort of the security side of things, particularly the Security Plus. I think was a good foundational sort of step into some of that more technical information. They get it sort of down into the nitty gritty of your crypto and stuff like that. So it's, I think they're good. And it's a bit of a bonus that you can sort of, if you've already done one, you can do it. But I think just personally, I think the lecturer who done the unit through IT Masters, I think they cover it a little bit easier to understand, which is a bit of bonus for IT Masters. With the Comptia side of things, I think they do it as a very technical level, so that it's a little bit more harder to understand. But I definitely still think.
Hello, Craig, you there? Can folk hear me?
I'm glad it just wasn't me. I couldn't hear Craig, but I can hear you, Guy.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll try and answer some questions whilst we try and figure out what's going on with Craig. Shadrach has asked, is it a must for one to be an ethical hacker for him to be successful in cybersecurity? Two ways to answer that question. I certainly hope that if you are hacking, you do it ethically. But also, you know, it's not, so it looks like we've lost Craig altogether just from losing the screen as well, but I'm sure he'll sign back in. So yeah, hopefully if you're hacking, you're doing it ethically, but also, you know, I hope that tonight has demonstrated that you don't need any one particular skill set to be jumping into cybersecurity. There's so many different pathways and there's so many different skills needed. And I can only see that being more the case in the future, that, you know, if you've got hacking skills, fantastic. If you don't, that's okay. It's mostly about attitude and a willingness to learn, I think, and the ability to maybe get on the front foot if you don't have the technical skills and sort of put yourself in other people's faces in the nicest way possible to get into it. So I hope that helps. Jacob asks, can you work from home in the cybersecurity industry? Oh, I might actually wait for Craig to come back to answer that one, because I'm sure the answer simplistically is yes, but it might be interesting to hear stories about, you know, whether it's always the case that you can. All right, there's a lot of good questions that I am not qualified to answer, but we'll keep on going. Ronald's asked, having an IT background and a career break, is it worth doing a boot camp? Absolutely. You know, if it fits with your objectives, if you want to do something quickly, and it might be a bit more expensive to do it in a boot camp setting, but if it expedites the process and you want to go through that process, well, absolutely, Ronald. There's, as I say, no right or wrong way to do it. And something I always say is, there's no, is it certifications that are better? Is it a boot camp that's better? Is it qualifications better? No. There's all sorts of advantages to both, and they usually would complement each other quite well. So Goyun has asked about 1 or 2 books to get started. So we've got a few links, but also I'll ask Craig about.
I'm back now. I don't know what happened now.
Yeah, we lost you for a minute, but I kept on faffing about and
I was talking away, and then I realised it was disconnected. I'm like, oh, no one's listening.
So I've just been answering a few of the questions that
Good.
I could hopefully get somewhere close to an accurate response. If you'd like to share your screen just so we can have a nice picture of your book up there, that'd be nice. But there's no real need if that's a problem. But we'll put a few questions to you, and we'll keep on going until basically we exhaust them. I might cut questions off now though, or actually I'll cut them off, at the top of the hour. Any that come after that, I'll dismiss them, but we'll just keep going with the answers, with the questions that we have. Mohammed's asked, can I get audio of this lecture? So probably within about 24 hours, we'll have to you a recording of the webinar. We'll have a recording of a log of the chat, and if we can, the Q&A. We'll get you a few important links for good resources that Craig's recommended, and also a few links to sort of information if you're interested in furthering your study. You can follow your nose with those ones. So we'll give you as much information as we can. The important thing is that you come along, and we're grateful for that. Manpreet asks Craig about some entry-level positions that they can apply for. Is there any sort of standard titles that sort of spring to mind?
Sorry, I just missed the question. I just had my little one come in at the same time.
No, that's all right. Are there any sort of entry-level positions titles that people can apply for, or search for on job websites that sort of spring to mind?
I think if we're talking probably entry-level stuff, I think the security awareness stuff is probably something they sort of need to look towards, or your level 1 SOC roles, I think, is probably a really good starting point. I definitely think as long as they're not going for the senior positions, I think that's probably where a lot of them will make the mistake. They'll try and get into those sort of senior ICT security engineer roles. And that's where you'll get a lot of your knockbacks. So I think if you can go for that sort of level 1 sort of junior SOC roles, I think that'd be really good.
Beauty. David's asked whether the Cisco CyberOps will be a good entry point. Again, it's just a question of whatever fits with your objectives, and there's no one right way to do it. If it fits with what you can do, go for it. But it's certainly a reputable certification. So yeah, Craig, we were talking whilst you were away about some good books to start with. I know we've got a bunch of links to blogs and those sorts of things, but have you got any sort of, I guess, long form resources that come to mind?
There's definitely a few around. If you look up, Mandy Turner does a good sort of easy sort of understand sort of a book on cybersecurity. I think it's Demystifying Cybersecurity, I think is the name. It's quite a good book. Charmaine Tan has done another one as well. She's done a lot of CISO interviews with a lot of people and sort of put together a really sort of structure, sort of learnings from that sort of area. So you could pick up quite a lot from that. I've quite enjoyed that book. Phil Monzongo has done another one. His book is quite good, but I think initially I would probably have a look at a couple of those if you're interested. I can certainly share a few links to those so you can check them out.
Yeah, sweet. We'll include them in the email.
But yeah, I think to start with, I'd probably, maybe have a look at some of the initial content that a lot of the professionals are already sharing on the Cybersecurity University website. And then sort of like your LinkedIn and your Twitter and stuff like that, as to give you that sort of base foundation knowledge, and then maybe look at one of those books. Try and get something that's probably not overly mundane, overly thick, something that's a little bit more lighthearted. You'll probably take it in a little bit better. I personally do. If it sort of tries to make it not as dry, I guess the word is. But yeah, it sort of comes down to personal preference of what sort of works for you, whether you look for the sort of the larger books, or you sort of go with the online videos or blogs or whatever sort of works best, whatever your learning style is, I guess you would say, is what would work better for you. But I personally do a bit of everything with the blogs and a bit of the readings, and it works quite well for me.
Interesting question from Etienne. Is cybersecurity in the end a misnomer? The real threats are advanced persistent threat crews for which most firms have little to no defense against. Would the real opportunity be in government work? Commercial would just be about patching and log monitoring in the end?
It's a good question. I like that question.
Yeah.
I guess probably could be partially right. I guess long term, if you wanted to get into more of the red teaming style, more of the offensive style, definitely government, ASD particularly probably, is where you would probably get a bit more hands-on, a bit more interesting positions. Depending on your financial targets, you won't get as much with the government sort of industry stuff as you would with the private. But yes, I think a lot of the time, a lot of the more commercial security positions are your log management, your SIEM platform management stuff. Not everyone is in the sort of red teaming space, which I have a little bit in the incident response and the red teaming. So I get a bit of taste of both, but yeah, not all commercial positions are. A lot of them you will just be in that sort of reviewing the logs, determining whether a response is necessary, cleaning up. So yeah, they can be quite mundane. That is something definitely to keep in mind in sort of SOC wise. There is quite a lot of mundane positions, but it depends on the type of person you are and whether that's a sort of a fit. I still quite enjoy the following the trail, the spider webs and the sort of breadcrumbs left behind by sort of an incident. I like to sort of see what they did and where they went. So it just depends on your personality fit, I suppose, what you will like and what you won't like.
Which seems to be one of the prevailing themes tonight. You know, so
finding what your niche is, what your channel is that you want to go down. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, here's one I wanted to ask you whilst I was answering questions myself. Jacob asked, can you work from home in the cybersecurity industry? I assume the simple answer is yes, but are there sort of roles where, you know, you can't do that?
I think that there is some. I primarily work from home most of the time, particularly in the penetration testing side of things. You can pretty much do that from anywhere. As long as you have a decent PC and a good internet connection, you can pretty much do it from most places. So yes, there's definitely a lot of opportunity. You can do the remote working. But there's also like your security awareness, your face-to-face stuff, a lot of your compliance stuff, and your more management style positions. You would be more office-based usually, or client-based, depending on what you're doing. I do a lot of on-site consultation stuff as well. So I'm a bit of variation, I suppose you would say. I do a bit of work from home and a bit of consultation stuff as well. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, beauty, thanks. Aaron's asked, which do you believe has the greatest positive or perhaps negative potential for protecting us in the future? Proprietary or open source environments and applications?
That's a good question. I have to think on that one.
Yeah, beauty. Feel free to chuck your responses in the chat as well, folks. Yeah, we've got lots of people out there listening, so.
I think it's probably a bit of, I don't think either one will probably prevail as the better. I think there's benefits and risks for both. So I'm not sure there is a yes or no for either side. I think it's probably comes down to that preference thing again, which seems to be definitely the theme. But a lot of people prefer the openness of your sort of your Linux and your Unix and stuff like that, where it's more peer reviewed. But yeah, it's hard to sort of say which one would be the better direction, I suppose you would say, to go.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's so many questions in there that, I think the answer is just, it depends. So it's making it a bit tough. There was another question I wanted to ask. Oh yes, this one's from Hassan. From cloud computing perspective, will cybersecurity remain the same, or how much will cloud computing, affect cybersecurity into the future?
I think it'll
or has
change
it already
to a
done it?
point, but it probably has to a point, because we're protecting more of a spanned environment where there is multiple customers on the same locations instead of single entity locations. But I think it's essentially the same platforms, the same systems that they're using. It's nothing really new. It's just changing the storage location, really, in my opinion. I think the part that's going to probably change that focus a little bit is more of the app hosting. Like, so your software as a service is a little bit different for the client side focus, because they're really only protecting their local machines, and the software as a service is, the security is the vendors or the providers sort of responsibility. But if you're talking about your hosted infrastructure wise, it's still the client's responsibility a lot of the time to make sure they're secure and they're protected. So I think, personally, I think it's not going to change too much in the short term, probably long term, as that cloud scenario evolves a little bit more, and less responsibility on the clients and more responsibility on vendors will change the way we approach things, possibly for the better, if the vendors themselves can be a more secure environment, a little bit more money, a little bit more time, possibly. I think that's probably certainly a benefit. But yeah, essentially, cloud is just a server sitting in someone else's room, basically. So it's essentially the same kind of thing, just on a larger scale. So yeah, I think the general idea is still the same.
Oh, there was a question that I've lost. Saeed, we've talked a lot about, I suppose, entry-level positions and people sort of making a transition to cybersecurity. Saeed's asked how long it would take to become a market-ready security analyst, and I'm particularly interested in sort of that perspective, or that the answer to people who have sort of jumped across, or who are in that entry-level position, how long they can expect it would take them to sort of make the next step.
I think, me personally, I definitely would like to see some of the attendees, if there's any on there, that sort of done the sort of same transition across. But it was probably a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, before I sort of started to learn, and before I got that first sort of major real component of security as part of my job. But it depends on the job, I guess, that you're wanting to get into. Some of your more entry level in your security awareness or your human side of things will be easier to get into, to progress into, than, say, some of your red teaming positions. Red team will probably take quite a few years of learning the skills you need, or getting slightly lower roles to make your way up to that position. But yeah, I think I'm hoping there's some more people that can share some of their sort of insights. But yeah, generally, I think it's just a couple of years. I think you've got to sort of go towards. Just depends on that sort of position itself, what you want to be, what your end goal is, and what you sort of want to achieve. Would determine that sort of time frame of what you're getting to. But entry level, you could get into probably most entry levels, probably sort of 6 to 12 months, if you sort of crack down and sort of really sort of try and get in there and learn and build the skills and the relationships you sort of want to get into. I think you'd be quite successful, particularly if you can sort of interact a bit with some of the industry and find a sort of a stepping stone in there with somebody you can build a relationship with.
Thanks. There was one that I could answer, which I was very excited about. Anonymous attendee has sent in thoughts on the Master of Management Cyber Specialization versus the Masters of Cybersecurity. We actually have an MBA computing where you can get a specialization in cybersecurity. So for some people that will be, I suppose, more relevant to them. It depends really how much you like to get your hands dirty. what your experience is, and where you'd like to go in the future. You know, I think knowing that there's such a diversity of roles out there in the field, you know, like it might be unrealistic for you to expect of yourself to be able to catch up with, you know, 20 years of experience in a really, you know, hands-on technical operational role, but you might have a bunch of understanding as to how, you know, security might affect a business. You might be able to be the person that is the conduit between perhaps executive management teams and the SOC or the IT manager or the cybersecurity managers that will be actually implementing the strategies that you help develop. Again, it's a maybe question, but, and I guess you know, that's one of the, you know, we say it's the key takeaway tonight. I guess that's the only reason I could be in any way useful to any of you is to sort of talk through that with you and sort of put together a study plan, sort of say, well, what are your strengths? Which strengths would you like to develop? Let's talk about it. So if you're keen on that, you know, by all means, get in touch later on. So many questions. I reckon we'll try and wrap up with a couple left. Okay. Anything you like the look of? Can you see the questions, Craig?
I have been letting you pick from. I'll see if I can have a look what they are.
No, that's all right. Keep doing that. Here's an interesting one from Saima. I've already done my master's in computer science. I don't have industry experience though. To proceed in cybersecurity, should I consider another master's in cybersecurity, or can I just go ahead for the certifications?
I'd probably, just my personal opinion, probably look at some of these certification side to build a little bit of that industry side of your qualifications. Maybe even try and get a little bit more hands-on, even if it is only sort of building your own skills to sort of a home lab or something like that, just to get your technical skills in that sort of arena where you want to end up, so you have the knowledge. Because a lot of the time I found sort of in that sort of interview process as you're going through, they will ask you some scenarios of how you would do something, how you would approach something. So it'd be good, I think, if you probably built a little bit of hands-on skills as well, maybe with a bit of home lab stuff, depending on which sort of arena you wanted to get in, of course. But by all means, if you want to go for a second master's or something like that, I did too. So it's certainly not unusual in my case. I think I got benefit from doing too. But it just depends on what you want to do and what sort of direction you want to go.
Yeah, and at the risk of upsetting my sales and marketing manager, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I certainly think it, you know, even for people that, you know, don't necessarily have a master's in computer science, if you're already working full time in either an area of IT or in a completely different industry, I think it would be, you know, a really good idea to perhaps consider, you know, doing a grad cert in cybersecurity, just to make sure you've got the qualification side of things, but then, you know, apply for the entry-level jobs and focus on building the hands-on skills, getting the certifications, and you know, being able to do your job. You know, we want to set people up for success. There's no point just sort of getting you to dual masters at great cost, and you know, you're no further down the track than you would have been if you'd just done the grad cert. I would say do the grad cert, get a bunch of industry certifications, come back and finish off the masters when it works for you, when you're consolidated, and no doubt, because you've got industry experience and certifications, you're probably going to get a bit of credit towards the rest of the masters anyway. So yeah, whether it's, you know, you're looking for credit from an old masters, or you want to just get your hands dirty, or, you know, there's no one way to do it. It's about starting a conversation and then, you know, working out what's best for you, and putting together a plan to, you know, help implement it. We want to set people up for success, and, you know, I do mean that. So faffing about as usual, terribly sorry everyone. So Etienne's worried that that they don't want to be staring at alerts all day, which seems to be a typical role. Is this a bit of a misunderstanding? Is this a common misperception?
If you're going for that sort of SOC role, I think, to be honest, you are going to get quite a chunk of that. and it can be quite mundane at times. So I think it's certainly something that you've got to be prepared for, but it depends on what sort of role you're going for. If you want to be more on the human side of things, you can definitely get out from the alert side of part of things, and you can move into that compliance or management side. But if you're looking at a SOC job, there's not a lot of the investigation side. It is a lot of logs and a lot of reviewing and seeing of incidents and the way that they sort of process. So sadly, yes, there is a fair chunk of mundane log looking stuff, but yeah, I still think it's an interesting job as long as you can put up with the fact that it's not all going to be exciting Hollywood style hacking stuff or anything like that. But I definitely think it's a worthwhile career, and definitely can be interesting if you can sort of deal with the odd mundane timeframes there. I think I answered the question.
I think so too. Let's go for one last question. Thanks for sticking around a little longer. Arun asks, I work with banks in the risk and controls area. Given the current scenario of heightened number of cyber attacks, what are some of the key areas for people in this particular area to keep in mind when developing controls for banking and financial services businesses?
That's a really great question. I think probably with the control side of things, because it's a little hard because you've got to try and put in the controls that are usable and workable, but you've got to sort of keep a finger on the pulse of what is coming in the future, like particularly with your AI and your ransomware levels that are coming through. I think it's going to be hard to sort of look forward a little bit with some of those controls, but I think you've just got to probably keep a bit of pulse on what is happening in the industry if you can, to sort of see what's coming through, so you can do that sort of preparation and not overwhelm yourself too much. But I don't know if I've answered the question exactly, but I think, yeah, just try and keep your finger on the pulse and keep sort of an eye on what is happening in the industry itself, so you can sort of accommodate those sort of configurations and the planning to sort of meet what's coming forward, which is easier said than done. But I think I've answered the question. You can tell me if I skimmed over it a little bit. But
oh no, it's we answer it the best we can, and no doubt that would be the same for all sectors. There would be industry standards and things relevant to particular industries. And again, it's about making sure you're sharing your knowledge and keeping in touch with everyone, no doubt. All right. Well, that's a lot of bloody questions answered. So yeah. I guess all that's left to do really is thank everyone for hanging out with us. I hope you got something out of it. Feel free to get in touch with us. We'll send a load of information to you now, well, not now, but tomorrow. Relevant to the discussion. We'll point you in the right direction for some extra reading, so you can actually implement some of the things that Craig's talked about. I'm always available if you want to talk about turning that into a discussion about studying. There's no, as we said, there's no one thing to take out of this. It's just whatever works best for you. So thank you all for listening, and thank you, Chantel, for coming along and looking after the chat for one thing, and for your insights into the educational side of things. And Craig, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. I hope you had a nice time doing it. Thanks so much for coming along.
No worries. I'm happy to, if anyone has any other questions or anything, I'm happy to try and answer them. But shoot them through to Guy or me directly if you want to look me up. But it was quite a good night, and I think we had a reasonably good discussion. So
that's the main thing. One next thing. What's the next book? Well, I know you've sent me a little bit of stuff across, but I'm quite interested in letting others know about it too.
Yep. There is a Hacker IM Volume 2, which is on its way, which should be in the next sort of 2 months, I would assume, 2 to 3 months. And then I'm actually working on a hacker fantasy called Foresight, which is completely different. It's on the fantasy style of things, with still hacking sort of based. So it's definitely a different writing style and an interesting sort of bit of a challenge, but sort of a quarter of the way, a little bit over a quarter of the way writing it. So it's moving forward, which is pretty good.
Yeah, something to look forward to for all you cyber folk out there. I'm sure I won't understand a word of it. So yeah, so thanks heaps, everyone. Thanks, Craig, particularly. If anyone else wants to, who's listening out there as a graduate of ours and wants to, have a chat about their experience, I'd love to do that too. But yeah, couldn't be more pleased with tonight. Thanks a lot, Craig.
No worries at all.
Good night, all.
Okay, good night.